welcome to our ITSMF UK webinar. My name's Barclay Ray. I'm your host for today. Delighted that many of you can join, and also delighted to welcome our sponsors who are NetBrain. And I will introduce Alex Hammett from NetBrain shortly. Our topic today is ShiftLeft and how to empower service management. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges with ShiftLeft and then some of the potential solutions and ways of dealing with that as we go. That's me looking fresh and young. This is the first of a new series of our webinars from ITSMF UK, and they will include sponsored ones like this. There'll be member case studies, lots of different types of presentations, some that have been at our recent ITSMF annual conference in London, but all with good content, interesting content for those working in the service management field. So please join us for more. Thank you for joining us for this particular session today. I just want to point out to those of you that are joined that you can ask questions as you go. In the bottom right of your screen, you will see a chat box where you can actually post your questions. We're moderating the session, so we'll mostly take questions at the end. If there's anything that really pops up that we can answer quickly, we may do that, but there's quite a bit to get through, so please post your questions, and we'll try and answer them to the best of our ability. Okay, so it's my pleasure today to introduce Alex Hammett from NetBrain. Hi, Alex. How are you doing?
Hey, how you doing, Barclay?
Great, thank you. So I'm going to let you just briefly introduce yourself, then we'll come on and talk a little bit about NetBrain. But it looks like you've been working, you've been around, so to speak, in the nicest possible way in terms of working in the industry.
Yeah, so I think as a brief introduction, I think I've had over 20 years of experience in and around the service management world. NetBrain is indeed the first organization that I've worked for kind of outside of the service management space. I started my career, very early career, at a company called Nortel Networks, which is no longer with us. And then through a variety of roles, mainly as a consultant, used my ITIL V2 manager's qualification to help organizations realize the value of ITIL and service management in improving the quality of services delivered to their customers at an acceptable cost. And I've done that at a number of organizations, from HP Software, Remedy, ServiceNow, Sherwell, and most recently having been asked to lead NetBrain in January this year.
Excellent. So a good variety of experience, hands-on there as well, particularly from the product perspective. I'll just move on to talk a little bit about NetBrain, and just they're not a name that we know immediately in this space, although obviously well established. Pick out some of the headlines there. Lots of customers across global coverage,
yeah, sure.
into countries.
Yeah, sure. So if I briefly explain, what does NetBrain do? NetBrain automates the discovery, documentation, troubleshooting, task automation, and change management of your total network. And I think in the context of that capability, some of these statistics make sense in terms of why we're trusted by 33% of Fortune 100 companies. NetBrain's been around for 15 years. And we're very proud to have a huge variety in some of the largest and most complicated customer networks as customers of NetBrain. And this has helped us build not only our understanding of a wide variety of different hardware vendors, over 90 of them we support straight out as it is, but it's also helped us develop our product to really maximize the value we add to customers have very complex, very diverse networks. And we've done so for the last 15 years. Not so well known in EMEA, although we are very proud to have some big names as customers. But it's only recently in the last year and a half that we've decided to build a European team, and we're now up to about 70 people across the UK, Ireland, and areas of Germany and Northern Europe.
Okay, thank you. That's a good overview. Obviously established in a number of territories, building it up here in the UK and beyond in EMEA. So that's good to hear. And obviously, with experience both in the product and across a number of different sectors. So thank you for that. We'll come back to that in terms of solutions and things as we go. And the topic for today, and thank you for the introduction. The topic for today really is ShiftLeft, and I just want to spend 30 seconds on that, just from a kind of generic point of view as to what that challenge actually is. Now, in ITIL version 4, we're clarifying what we mean by ShiftLeft as being moving work to the most suitable or optimal place, particularly from the customer point of view. And so for example, in DevOps, that means moving it to the right people. In support, it is traditionally meant moving from third to second and second to first. And that's a well-established path. We know, for example, that the more you escalate, the less people are happy as customers, the longer it takes. The more you interrupt projects, the further up the chain you go. And also, the more it costs. So resolving at first level is relatively inexpensive. It's quick. It gets customers back working and happy. Tier 2 is a bit more time and effort. Tier 3, it could be days, weeks, months, and cost a lot more. So the idea being that we move what we do as much as possible through, use of tools, automation, knowledge management, all those things to get that resolution done earlier in the chain. And that very often means automation. More and more these days, it does mean pushing it right back to the systems level where people don't even notice that things have happened. So that's what we mean by ShiftLeft: moving work, controlling flow, understanding what's the best solution in terms of our business customers and our businesses, and making sure that what we are doing supports that in the most optimal way. And very often it's quite challenging with lots of technical hierarchies, both in terms of systems and people. And I guess so the first question back to you, Alex, is, I know that you've got this slide here about, that overwhelming demand. Volumes of alerts and events, work that needs to be managed, in the most optimal way. Is that where you start with clients? Do they come into it and say, how do we make sense of all this, or what is it? How do we control this in a way that works best for our clients?
Yeah, sure. So if you don't mind, if you just embellish me a little bit about what I found when I joined NetBrain, having spent my entire career talking to organizations about processes. When I arrived at NetBrain, which is an organization that's been very focused on NetOps and network operations, I came into the organization and I heard phrases like MTTR, I heard phrases like codifying of complex, tasks, and allowing, lesser skilled lesser skilled people in the organization to use it. And really what I heard was a kind of a process language. It was very familiar to me, but it was clear that we had not really spoken that way. So when I joined, I decided that, we needed to build a partnership with yourselves, and we needed to sort of change the way that we explained our value. I mean, one of the things that we have noticed is that, customers' networks, unlike storage and infrastructure, the network has become even more complex, and it's becoming more complex at a rate of knots. Networks are becoming more dynamic, software defined, they're virtualized and self-healing. But yet I still found from speaking to customers that they hadn't been able to answer questions like, how do you troubleshoot in an effective way a complex, dynamic, software defined network? Or questions like, how do we perform change on a very, on a network that's very diverse, number one, is software defined, and could also be very transient. And I think it's fair to say, Barclay, that in my entire time of selling service management solutions, I think it's fair to say that most organizations have either been unsuccessful, given up, or have really struggled in underpinning their service management function with a CMDB that accurately represents how services are delivered to customers and users. So when I put this slide together, I wanted to kind of, use it to really evidence the fact that in a large enterprise network, it's becoming more complex, not more simplified. So therefore, our value in how we can drive simplification of the management of those networks is really coming to bear right now. If we move on to the next slide, Barclay, what we're able to do through all of our experience of all of the different vendors is take troubleshooting tasks and automate them right at the, sorry, build the slide out, please, Barclay. Automate them and codify them within a control plane, which is NetBrain, but yet they can be triggered either in an automated way or on demand by your first and second line. Furthermore, at the point at which, for example, an incident is even created, NetBrain can, at a machine-to-machine time frame, create a dynamic, documented configuration of your network at the very time that that incident is either logged by a person, preferably not, or is created by a monitoring system, which means that the time it takes to troubleshoot, understand, and collaborate with your colleagues about what the problem is, and then the resources and their level of skill to remediate is massively reduced. Not wanting to go into too much detail on this call, but today, network engineers are logging on to individual network devices at a command line, and they're doing it 10 or 20 times, which is error-prone and time-consuming. We do that in seconds. So therefore, taking the capabilities of automation within NetBrain and embedding them in an incident process, for example, helps surround people making vital decisions with the very best information.
Okay, so that's very much functional information as to what you can do. In terms of, the question for me with that would always be, and I agree that very few organizations have got accurate CMDBs. Very often ask it at conferences, how many of you can guarantee that your CMDBs are even 90% accurate? And you never get a hand going, or you might get one brave soul. So I suppose the question is, how are you able to guarantee that that information is accurate? What are you sourcing or using to do that? And what does that mean in terms of your customers, I guess, or practitioners, in terms of what they need to do to prepare that knowledge, that information?
Yeah, sure, I understand. So look, at the very heart of NetBrain is our ability to discover your total network configuration, again, regardless of manufacturer, regardless of whether it's software defined. And what I mean by that is that when we create a visual map or a diagram, or even we help people understand how the end user connects to a service or a set of applications, for example, we are building those diagrams based on the configuration data of your network. That's the real secret sauce of NetBrain. When we discover your network devices, we also do a very in-depth, detailed configuration discovery, and we build maps and we build those path information based on how we understand the network is configured to talk to each other. Because of the way we approach discovery, in that we perform it maybe several times a day or maybe once a day, your configuration of your network is recorded and logged in the NetBrain database. So we're able to see how your network was configured yesterday, how it was configured today, how it was configured 5 minutes ago. It's all based around the data. And I think you'll agree with me, Barclay, that processes without accurate data are less effective. And that's where really the NetBrain can add value in getting the right data and the detailed data to the people who make those decisions as part of processes.
So the question coming on from that is, I suppose, is how that copes with, does that just reflect changes? I mean, you know, there's no such thing as a static network or static system. Is it, are you simply doing that, constantly checking on what's on the network, or are you involved in that change process as well?
Yeah, so it's really the same process that underpins our security and compliance capability, as well as our ability to detect unauthorized changes. We've built integrations to the leading service management providers, ServiceNow, BMC, for example, and we have a defined change process within NetBrain that's been built in alignment to ITIL. And we use a combination of ServiceNow as the control system and then NetBrain as the kind of planning system to perform those changes. We also have the ability to define what we call golden paths between users and applications. And we can run those once an hour and alarm if the configuration of the path of the network between a user and a service changes. So we're kind of capturing it from both angles. We're being very proactive in our automation by constantly checking the path to make sure that configuration changes aren't being made that aren't approved. And secondly, is we're using a combination of performing change automatically with NetBrain and detecting unauthorized change within NetBrain to capture when things are happening that perhaps aren't within an approval cycle.
What do you mean by performing changes automatically with NetBrain then? Is that just in response to what may have been automated on the, well, what may have been changed on the network?
So it will detect an unauthorized change and inform you of the difference, if you like, or the diff between two states. But also your network engineers, your architects, they can plan changes within NetBrain, configuration changes that they wish to make. They cannot perform them until the change is approved within ServiceNow, for example. But we also baseline before and after so that we have a full closed loop from the change being raised to the change being performed and approved and then validating. So
just taking it away from the tooling and the software a little bit for a minute. What would, if I'm a practitioner looking at this and or looking at how to improve, you know, I've been tasked with shifting left in my organization, and this is maybe an option, but again, what do I need to do to make this work? What sorts of things, if we can pull them out into the more generic, what kind of generic things do we need to do as practitioners to enable this type of work? You know, in terms of how we would document it and how, you know, what kind of controls we need to have over our configuration.
So I think everything starts with getting a baseline of the data right now. So I think that understanding the configuration and connectivity of my total network would be step one. I think that in addition, working with the NetOps guys to understand what are the standard tasks that are performed when troubleshooting the network. Because I think that what we found is that network specialists, network engineers, they go on a process of, if you like, discovering more data as part of troubleshooting where the problem is. So step number one is collecting information about my network, collecting information about routing tables. Now, quite detailed information collection happens first before actually any kind of triage or investigative work happens. And I think it's a case of engaging with those NetOps guys to understand what is the basic set of information and data that helps speed up the process of moving immediately into how can we remediate or relieve the scenario versus, you know, the process starting by collecting more information.
So, I mean, things like, I mean, you talked about run books and how we use that kind of approach to I suppose more accountability, more consistency in what we do. I mean, in the experience that you have of working with clients, I mean, do you encourage them to create run books?
Yeah, I think that the process of continuous improvement and knowledge management has to be part of the conversation of how you codify the knowledge that's in people's heads in the third line, and you begin to move it, further to the left. The reality is that within NetBrain, all of the interaction with the network, all of the data retrieval, or indeed all of the remediating tasks or activities are all performed within NetBrain. So there's a real control element within the product itself. Any activity that is performed, whether it's a specific type of troubleshooting runbook or a specific request to grab more information, all of these can be performed from within your service management tool, but they actually happen within NetBrain. So there's nothing that's performed, if you like, on the network that hasn't gone through a kind of a knowledge approval process when creating those runbooks.
But yeah, I'm just trying to put it into the sort of more generic terms. What makes a good run book? Put it that way, because there's one of those terms that we use a lot when we say we need to have good run books, and actually, what my interpretation of that and yours might be different. What do you think, or what do you need as a good run book from a client?
I think that it's as kind of previously stated, it's a sequence set of steps that they do. I would, like with most things, I would start automation extremely simply. So I would start with a few tasks that are always run as part of the analysis or diagnostics within a problem. And I would, if you like, begin to version control through knowledge management how these run books are reviewed and improved over time. And I think that NetBrain plays a part in that, because we make suggestions, we surface suggestions through the product to people of additional steps and tasks that can be taken. But I think the essence of answering your question, Barclay, is to understand, what's done today, keep it simple, and then ensure it's part of a continuous loop cycle that means that it's being reviewed and it's being enhanced over time, much like a knowledge article itself.
Okay, just moving on then to the sort of more general question of automation. With the age we're in now, there is more and more automation. We're talking about automation tools effectively. There's lots of challenges that we hear about at conferences and blogs and things about, people having the right data, people having the right quality of data. How do you, as a vendor, how do you ensure, because I mean, if a client comes to you and says, we want to do this, blah, 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 how do you ensure that, one, that they have good data, or that they have good understanding or can give you good information about what they're supporting, and how do you ensure that they, I suppose, are measuring the right things? Because I mean, with a lot of debate about MTTR and various other of those kind of metrics more recently, are they really the things that people should be measuring? I mean, do you provide advice on other types of metrics that people might consider to be useful or valid in what they're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple of questions there. So on the first one, what we find almost unanimously is that customers don't have good data about their networks. I think that at its very heart, the documentation of how your network's configured is today very labor intensive and often out of date. So I think in 99% of the cases, when we're talking to a new prospect about about their network, the very entry point is, we actually don't know what we've got. We could find out what we have, but it's very labor intensive. It takes a long time, and as soon as we produce the documentation, it becomes out of date. So finding a customer who has very good data and then validating that NetBrain's doing its job with great data is a very rare occurrence. In fact, it's very unlikely to happen at all. On the second part of your question, I would say that one of the things that we do find is it a metric that we suggest? I'm not so sure, but we find that the time it takes to prove that it isn't the network is also a valid use case and value statement for NetBrain, because it's very rare these days that a customer has an entirely internal IT support delivery function. And so what happens is that with uncertainty as to exactly where a problem might be, and I think it's very easy on one case to say, oh, it's not working or it is. That's quite binary. It's more the performance degradation, or it happens at a certain point of time in the day, or it's only lunchtimes, for example. Being able to use NetBrain and not just NetBrain, but being able to use automation to prove what it isn't is also, we've found to be extremely valuable. I think in terms of how you would construct a metric, I mean, we talk about mean time to innocence, but I think it would be more a case of looking at
let me stop you there. Mean time to innocence. What does that mean?
It's not us. In other words, it's not the network. But yeah, hence why I reserved saying it. But I think really the measure of that is the number of hops that a ticket would make around your different teams, right? Which can be extremely costly when you have a tower that's being provided by an outsourced partner. Mm-hmm. So incidents can drop into different teams. They come out again because it's not us, it's not us, it's not us. It must be the network.
And it's one that's tracked on the service desk standard. Actually, the bounce rate, effectively, the number of reassignments. Okay. Yeah, but just take me. So mean time to innocence. Obviously, I mean, I'd be looking for mean time to guilt.
Okay, fine. That's a good one. Yeah.
But I suppose there is that thing about ownership and lines of ownership. So one of the areas that I'm quite heavily involved in is if you like, how we take the configuration management information and turn it into sort of service bundles, and that are much more kind of business aligned at a layer up, at a level up from the technical. But what are the main components of a service, and what is attached to that? I mean, I suppose the question is from the point of view of what's measured. You can probably measure anything, but I mean, I'd be interested to know about how you might be able to combine various metrics and again, it's an ITIL 4 thing where we're talking about, how do we think of the whole value stream of what's going on? I mean, do you have customers where they've got multiple metrics that are then kind of rolled up into, I suppose, more customer-facing or service-facing offerings?
I mean, sure that they will. We tend to play, our part purely in the network. But I think it's worth pointing out that, when, in terms of bringing teams together, what we find is that being able to collaborate around a map of the problem is extremely beneficial to organizations who are looking to very quickly find out where the problem is and very quickly understand its impact to customers, mm-hmm. Be it internal or external. We're very networks focused, so we will be able to show a map between users, for example, and services and etc. And we can most definitely overlay additional data on top of that. For example, the sort of data that might come from an APM tool, for example, or the sort of data that would come from Nexthing. So we use NetBrain as a single kind of collaboration portal where information about the network can be enhanced by monitoring information, current open incidents, and additional changes. I know it doesn't really answer your question about the metrics there, because I said we're very network focused in terms of where we help with the diagnostics and the troubleshooting. But I think there is most definitely a part to play in terms of, understanding the total service that you deliver to your customers. And as earlier on, networks are becoming more complicated. So north-south traffic is being replaced by east to west.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't even, I mean, I think actually even at the technical, still at the fairly technical level, you can still be talking about combining some of those things. I just wondered if there's, when we talk about what automation and AI and all those kind of things can do, they're usually looking at how the systems can, more intelligently understand what's going on. So I was thinking more in terms of, are you able to set up multiple criteria, with, if there's an event somewhere and then there's another trigger somewhere else, and you can actually see that maybe relates to a third component, or that's, do you know what I'm saying on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and that sort of sits within a kind of a parallel kind of domain to us around, the monitoring and availability side of things. See,
Yeah.
we use that kind of alerting in order to instantly map the configuration of your network at that time. So the conversations that we have, Barclay, is that, maybe an intrusion detection system or your SIEM tool, for example, might find a sequence of events that it decides constitutes an alarm. We are often asked to take that alarm at whatever time of the day it is and automate the mapping and configuration of the network at that very time, so that when the situation is gone, as I said before, some incidents are very transient these days, you have a photo of the crime scene, if you like, of what was actually happening with regards to the configuration of your network at that time, and that includes ports, traffic flows.
So you provide that in, you dynamically provide that information, and it is accurate information at that time.
At that time, timestamped, and you can kind of again do a verification check between, this has happened. This is how my network was configured at 1 o'clock in the morning. This is what it looks like now. This is what it looks like yesterday, and perform a comparison across those different data sets to understand what exactly was my network configured to do at that time, in the very second that it happened.
Okay, that's interesting, because again, that's something that no human could really be expected to do or understand dynamically.
And also the time pressures. Exactly right. And also the time pressures, specifically around obligations to information commission officer, whatever it might be, is that information about maybe a breach of a technical breach of service, whatever it might be, we're able to provide a level of documentation, not only at the point in time when that happened, which is a requirement by law, but also the evidence of what changes were made and the proof that the changes were made in the subsequent follow-up and incident review after the case. And I think we do find customers who have had scenarios happen and had to mobilize to great expense a lot of Visio and documentary evidence to talk to what was exactly happening at that point in time.
Okay. All right. That's really interesting stuff. Just to sort of round the conversation off and back to the kind of shift left things, or what we've talked about is the capability to, I suppose, provide immediate and dynamic automation, presumably restorative actions, as well as escalation or communication, that can take away some of that pain at the front level, and also then push tickets and information to the appropriate technical people. I mean, we talk these days about things like swarming and dynamic SWAT teams and so on, that rather than the kind of tiered system slowing us down, this definitely seems to support that as well. We've talked about runbooks and various levels of technical automation that are needed to support it. So there's a number of things there I'm sure would be useful and valuable to the service management practitioners out there. Can I just ask you, just finally, what you, just in summary, in terms of if I'm a service management manager or buyer, or I'm an ops manager, just in a sort of really elevator terms, what the ultimate value of doing this would be, and then we can take some questions.
Yeah, I think most definitely collaboration is something that we look to support. I think that bringing, like you say, the kind of tier system is changing in terms of support structures. So how do we get the right experts in a collaborative way working together, not just in resolving incidents, but also in performing an analysis as part of the approval of change, for example. And I think that, what NetBrain provides is, it's sort of like a Google Translate. NetBrain does all of the talking to the network equipment of all of the vendors. So when you're interacting with your network through NetBrain, it's by its very nature simplified because you ask NetBrain to perform a task on your total NetBrain, and NetBrain performs all of the translation. So you're taking a lot of complexity, a lot of expertise that previously would have lived in one or two individuals, and you're beginning to surface that and make it much more available to the rest of your team, because you can perform things on the network in a controlled way without having specialty skills. But secondly, is that through NetBrain, you have a single map with data overlaid that brings people together, which why really this is a joint initiative. This is about bringing those experts and making them feel comfortable that people within the first or second line are able to perform diagnostics and remediation on the network without actually providing completely open access, and therefore increasing the risk of creating more incidents through either poorly executed changes or configuration updates, or just manual troubleshooting that could cause more problems than it resolves.
So it's reducing complexity by being sort of technical to technical. The ability for to removing the need for, I suppose, frontline people to have to engage directly with the technical systems, but at the same time being able to provide that kind of frontline response. Yeah,
exactly right. Exactly, it's kind of a control plane, if you like.
Yeah. And that's what we need to make Shift. That's one of the components that we need to make ShiftLeft work. Do we have any? Let me just see. A question that's there about the extent to which. So presumably this is managed and run by the more technical and expert people. They would be involved in configuring and using this system. And is there? I mean, one of the challenges in this question, and that I've always come across, is just the extent to which people at the third level are ready to give up some of their technical knowledge. Do you make it easy for them? Is it a challenge for them to move over to that kind of level of automation? Do you find?
I think that in my experience over the last 11 months is that when we meet with the guys in the network team, we're actually talking about making their lives easier, because most would like to be spending more of their time introducing new technologies like ACI, for example, or SDN. They want to be spending more time helping projects and project managers take new services and applications to market. So therefore, particularly in the network, because troubleshooting is very manual today, it's very command line driven, there's a lot of repetitive tasks that are performed again and again and again. And when we meet those guys, it's kind of like a management of change approach, really, Barclay, on showing them that we're not, this is not asking the turkeys to vote for Christmas. This is about helping remove the burden of daily repetitive, manual tasks to be automated by NetBrain, to allow them to spend more time on the project and continuous improvement processes, or even knowledge management processes as part of their role. And I think we find that that's how we win with those guys. The reason why this has to be a collaborative joint initiative with the service management functions as well, is that that's where the value realization will come from. understanding through problem management my trends by using the data of my network and proactively performing change management, understanding through metrics how my processes that are categorized for my network, how can we use NetBrain to constantly enhance and improve the data that supports troubleshooting. This is how we drive the benefit of NetBrain. It's through service management. But winning the hearts and minds of the networks guys is by showing how that we can release the part of their day job they don't like.
Okay, so very much pushing work to the right place, and that includes automating where required. Yeah. Okay, I don't think there's any more questions, and we're just I think we're pretty good on time. So I'm just going to round off now. There was, I hope we've answered that question in terms of it's something that really helps the technical people. Just finally, just to round off, this will be available on demand shortly, and there will be more ITSMF podcasts across a number of different areas, from not just technology, but obviously on management and process and practice and methodology, people, culture, all those kind of good things. Alex, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your input.
Thank you very much.
And for the kind of insights around ShiftLeft. Thank you to NetBrain for sponsoring this event, and we look forward to you joining us for more of these in future. And please participate if you want more information on them. Take a look on the itsmf.co.uk website for more information on NetBrain, netbraintech.com. Request a demo. Thank you very much for your time.